Dr. Poiani, thank you very much for showing up today and agreeing to be in our oral history interview.
Well, it's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Well, we'll start at the beginning. Can you tell me something about when and where you were born?
I was born in Nutley. Well, actually, I was born in Newark, New Jersey, at Columbus Hospital. And many years later, I did meet Mr. Bonamo, who was a member of the board here at St. Peter's College, and he reminded me I was one of his babies. He was one of the founders of that hospital. And I grew up in Nutley, New Jersey, about 7 miles north of Newark, attended all the Nutley public schools, and I feel like a native. My grandmother was born in Nutley, my mom was born in Nutley, and she graduated from Nutley High School in 1931, and I subsequently graduated in 1961 from Nutley High School. And after that, I was educated at Douglas College, the women's part of Rutgers, and then went on for a Ph.D. at Rutgers.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, can you tell me about, well, we'll get right into it. After you attended at Rutgers, what drew you to St. Peter's College?
Well, that's an interesting question. I had been completing a master's degree and was working on a Ph.D., and my dad was forced to retire from Bendix Aviation after close to 40 years. I said to him that I thought maybe it was time for me to get a full-time job because I had been going to college and graduate school on fellowships and teaching assistantships. And he thought, well, I should finish, but the long and the short of it is that I decided to apply, and I had 3 offers: Montclair State, Drew, and St. Peter's College. Well, what drew me to St. Peter's was the fact that it was Jesuit. I had 3 cousins who had graduated from Peters, all of whom are very successful, and I heard a lot about the school. I also was delighted to know it was near the New Jersey Turnpike, and I could zip to New Brunswick to get working on my dissertation, and also to Princeton, where my typist was for my doctoral dissertation. But it was not an easy choice at the same time, because I had never been to Jersey City before until I took the train up here to apply for the position. I had never gone to a Catholic school, although I had been very active in my parish in confraternity classes and in many of the activities associated with the CYO in those days, but just did not have an opportunity to attend one. So I came with the idea, though, that this would be a wonderful new experience, and I'd probably stay a couple of years. I have to add that I was influenced also by the fact that I met a wonderful Jesuit. The very first Jesuit I ever met was Father Francis Keating, who was a faculty member here at St. Peter's, and Father Keating came to speak at the Douglas College Newman Club, which was the Catholic group of students on the Douglas campus. And he was a wonderfully dynamic speaker, and he just enthralled and captivated his audience. So I had had a taste of what a Jesuit educator was, although in those days women were not admitted to the Jesuit colleges, at least not to the Jesuit colleges in this area. So unfortunately I wasn't able to attend one. But I feel like I've attended one after 31 years of being at St. Peter's.
I think you deserve an honorary...
honorary something, huh?
Yes.
So I did arrive on the doorstep of St. Peter's in 1967. I had been interviewed by the chairman at the time of the math department, who was Father Robert Canavan, and I guess officially hired by the executive vice president, Father Edmund Ryan. And I walked into a mathematics department of all men, and an institution that was, and so I was the first woman in the math department, and came to an institution that was just becoming coeducational. And in my first few years of teaching, however, I only had male students. I was teaching many of the upper level courses, and probably by then the math majors had all been male students. But one of the reasons that I was really lured here was the fact that St. Peter's was becoming a coeducational institution.
Well, I want to get back to that point in a minute, but I just want to go back and retrace what you said before. Your dissertation at Rutgers. Mm-hmm. What was your dissertation, and how did it fit into what your eventual field of study in mathematics was going to be at St. Peter's?
Well, my field is in pure mathematics, and my area is in special function theory, whereby I looked at Hermite and Laguerre series and polynomials and convergence issues related to them. They have while they're extremely abstract area, they do have a relationship to quantum mechanics. And I look back and say, what were my goals in life? And if you look at my high school yearbook, it will say that my goal was to be a college teacher of mathematics. So I guess I did look at, as the dean at Douglas used to say, keep your feet on the ground and your eyes on the stars. So we tried to do that. My training in mathematics was certainly to prepare me for the classroom, but Rutgers also paid a lot of attention to how you taught. And we had a series of Mason Gross seminars that focused on tips for teaching in colleges. And that was rather groundbreaking at that time, to pay attention not only to your discipline, which was of course your primary focus, but also to the importance of delivery and being an interested and a concerned faculty member.
What were some of the goals you set for yourself once you were hired by St. Peter's College? What did you want to do when you started teaching here?
Well, first of all, I wanted to relate well to the students. I wanted to be certain that I provided them with a rich foundation in terms of content, but at the same time to hopefully develop a sense of responsibility, a sense of mutual respect, that their work would be their own and that they would be responsible for what they did. I was very struck by the talented young people that sat in the classroom seats in front of me, many of whom at that time were veterans from the Vietnam War. And so the age spectrum was fairly diverse for that generation. I think one of my other goals was to see how I could enrich the department, how I could give back to the department. And one of the ways I tried to do that was, after I was here just about 2 years, to petition the National Office of Pi Mu Epsilon, and that's the National Mathematics Honor Society. St. Peter's did not have any national honor societies at the time, and I felt it was extremely important that our students get that recognition. And along with it went a free trip if they decided to present a paper at the national meetings. And I'm delighted to say that on the first try, our petition was accepted, and we were awarded a chapter, the Epsilon chapter in New Jersey of Pi Mu Epsilon. Dr. J.C. Eves, who was then the president from West Virginia University, came to install the chapter. And we have gone on to become one of the most active chapters in the country. And I'm very happy to tell you, and very honored to tell you, that I eventually became the national president and the first woman president of Pi Mu Epsilon after 75 years of its existence. So that was kind of a nice honor for me. In those early years, I also had an opportunity, because I felt St. Peter's needed recognition outside the state and outside the really broader recognition. So along with Professor Ellis of the English department, we applied for a chapter of Phi Beta Kappa. And one applies only every 3 years. It's called in the trilogy period. And we did apply, and although we got some high marks, unfortunately we were not approved. And we tried another time, and then decided that one of the main reasons we were not was that we did not have a large enough core of faculty who were in Phi Beta Kappa. And if one looks at the statistics, it was probably largely due to the fact that many had graduated from Catholic colleges and universities. And many of them at that time did not have chapters of Phi Beta Kappa. They tended to be largely in private, independent, old, vintage colleges and universities in the country. So for that reason, unfortunately, we did not continue to pursue it. But the fact that we did get high marks, I think, was another recognition of the talent of our students. So, and I've continued over the years to want to try to do that reach out so that our students could get more and more opportunities.
Tell me about some of your most promising students, the ones who have gone on and done great things outside of St. Peter's. Do they still keep in touch with you, or?
I do hear from a number of them, and their careers are extremely varied. From being the accountant of CBS, I remember Ramira McKelly in my probably first or second year here, whose son, by the way, has also come to St. Peter's, is now the head accountant for CBS and is in charge of one of the cable stations in Miami. Dr. Romeo, who is an optometrist and a leading expert in eyes and in contact lenses. In fact, she met her husband, George, in my calculus class. So we had a very nice meeting of the minds there. George Gurdock, and in fact, George is now one of the vice presidents for OptimaCard. Other math majors that we can think of course, although they were not my students, are Carol and Jim Bastek, who have been very involved in the college. We have had students that have gone on to work for AT&T and now Lucent and various technical organizations. Many extremely talented students who've gone on to teach in elementary and secondary schools. Even more who have opened their own businesses. And I think of Dori Celentano, who has been involved in the Board of Trustees and runs her own business with computer analysis as a consultant. There are so many students, and of course, although they were, those were some of the math majors, but there were many other students in my finite math class who've also done interesting and great things, like Kevin Bannon, who's the basketball coach at Rutgers University now, Jerry McCann, who was a mayor in Jersey City, Ken Sluka, who now is working for the planning department in Jersey City. And I literally am reminded of students all the time. It just makes you feel wonderful that you had the opportunity to teach them. And they've gone on, and that's what it's all about, being able to be a part of their educational experience and hopefully seeing them do wonderful things to really give back to their communities. And that's what St. Peter's mission certainly is all about. And I think I'm just one small piece in that, but hopefully all of us together can enrich their lives and the quality of their lives, and then they in turn the quality of other people's lives. So it's been a wonderful 31 years of getting to work with and know students. And I hesitate mentioning names because there are so many more that could be mentioned, but I'm sure others will come along as we discuss them. Oh, and I should add Bill Gutch, who was in charge of the Hayden Planetarium in New York, was another one of our very distinguished mathematics majors who has done some very exciting things.
And you are an important part of the school, Eileen.
Thank you.
Don't ever underestimate.
Thank you. Oh, I should mention, you were talking about Poiani Upsilon. This lovely medallion was one that it was given to me for Poiani Upsilon, and something that I treasure and always will.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, I just want to ask a few more questions about your starting point here. Rutgers, a big, sprawling state university. When you arrived in Jersey City and you saw the small campus on Kennedy Boulevard, what were some of your impressions of the place and how you would fit into the landscape there?
Well, it was certainly different. I walked from Journal Square to the college, and there were all kinds of ethnic restaurants just scattered throughout Journal Square at that time. And I had, what seemed to be a long walk, but it really wasn't. And when I arrived here, I think what struck me most was that it was a relatively small, family-oriented institution. There was a lot of personal attention given to the students. I had a warm welcome from the department. I was enthralled by the fact that they had an LPG 30, which was a really landmark computer that Professor Verricchio, who was then in the department and had been a consultant to Bell Laboratories, had been able to get for St. Peter's. And it was one of the first computers on a college campus other than, say, Princeton in New Jersey. I thought that was kind of landmark. I had worked for Bell Laboratories during the summer, and so I was familiar with doing some Fortran programming. In fact, I had plotted an Apollo moonshot on microfilm. So to me, this was very exciting that St. Peter's was kind of on the cutting edge of technology at a time when this was quite unheard of. So I think that there was a real welcome, and there were so I had a chance to meet with students. As I say, I had some relatives who went here, and so I was at least aware of opportunities. When I was at Douglas, I should tell you that the Glee Club used to come to Douglas College and sing, and then there was a mixer that followed it, and so that was another certainly social dimension of coming here. I can also remember that when I did arrive, early that semester, the Jesuit community would invite each department over for dinner. And I can remember it as if it were yesterday. We had a very warm welcome. I was given a lovely white orchid, and I was carefully ushered through the corridor, which now is the corridor that leads to the Degnan room and to the financial aid office. But the door of that corridor said cloister in big letters. And I must admit, I didn't look to the side very much. I thought, my goodness, I better be very careful. And I was ushered into this very lovely living room, which now is the Degnan room, and eventually taken upstairs by the elevator to where the dinner was held, and it was myself and my math colleagues, and given a very warm reception that, again, made me feel very much at home. So my feelings from that first interview were certainly borne out when I became a member of the St. Peter's family.
Who were some of your fellow faculty members in the math department at that time, and how did they help you or influence you, and how did you influence them?
Well, many of them are still here. I'm happy to say that Dr. Kiernan, who is a member of the department and very much active in the department, was one of my early faculty members, also a graduate of St. Peter's, as was Frank Rush, another graduate of the college, along with Dr. Alec Kalyanis. They were very active in the department, very willing to help and be of service. I was assigned to Jim Collins at the time, Professor James Collins, who taught calculus for us and had been one of the engineers that planned the Holland Tunnel. Jim was my mentor, and I learned a great deal from him. He worked also with the pre-engineering program, because at the time we had a cooperative arrangement with the University of Detroit, where a student, at that time a young man, could be here for 2 years and then go on to the University of Detroit, get a kind of dual degree, and eventually get a master's degree as well in engineering. And at the time, that was kind of a nice opportunity, and several of my former students did take that route. So he was certainly a very helpful person in my career. We also had Dr. Frank McMacken, and he had been the principal of Dickinson High School. He went on to become a faculty member here and had really been an extraordinary person. Many, many years later, when he was well into his 90s, I would pick him up, and he lived in Montclair, and I would drive him in for the Pine Upland dinners and then drive him back home at night. So we had a very nice relationship for a long time. I mentioned Frank Verricchio, Professor Verricchio, who was a wonderful colleague and eventually also became chair of the department, as did Dr. Kiernan and Dr. Rush. And he was, unfortunately, had passed away, but also was a person who encouraged us to be involved in the Mathematical Association of America, in which I did become involved. And he also encouraged other members of the department to become involved. There was also Dr. Aurelio Baldor. Now, he had come from Cuba, and if you mention the name Dr. Baldor to almost anyone at that time, 30 years ago or now, they will have definite name recognition, because he owned a school in Cuba, and he wrote most of the textbooks that were used throughout Latin America, and was really a legend in teaching mathematics. We were very, very fortunate to have him here at St. Peter's for a number of years. He was a marvelous, marvelous colleague. And I think of Professor Huber, and I think of Dr. Thomas, who came shortly after me, with whom I shared an office, as I did with Dr. Kiernan over the years. I want to be sure I remember everybody. I hope I have. But again, and there were one or two women that came into the department along the way. They did not stay for various reasons, going on to finish Ph.D.s and so forth. So they did not stay on to get tenure. They were not denied tenure, but they did not stay on to pursue that route. But gradually, and now we do have additional women in the department, and that's really, very exciting, because many of our math majors at the time and even now have been young women, and that's been really good for us. For instance, Dr. Carol Bastek, who went on to get her doctorate in mathematics education at Columbia, a number of our students who went on to teach mathematics, Lynn Coderidge, who went on to work for AT&T. So Barbara Mansfield, who worked for St. Peter's for many years in our information services office. Barbara was one of our star math majors as well. So we've been fortunate.
Wonderful. Probably the best day in the history of St. Peter's, 1966. Coeducation comes to the school. I just want to know what some of your feelings were about. I know you came after the year after, but what are some of your feelings about women at this traditionally all-male educational institution?
Well, certainly I think it was a wonderful opportunity for young women to be able to partake of a Jesuit education, to get involved in the Ratio Studiorum and the kind of rigors of Jesuit education. Although I must say they also enjoyed that at other colleges, particularly other women's colleges, where there was an attempt to develop leadership. But I think it was very nice and very productive for St. Peter's to do that. Now, what were the motivations? There were many, because certainly the war at the time was draining enrollments. There were shifts in population. There were all kinds of reasons why the institution decided to go co-ed. And I wasn't here when that decision was made, but I'm happy it was. And I think it was an important one for St. Peter's to make. I had always heard a lot about Jesuit education along the way, and it was something that just was shut out to women. So I think other than Wheeling, I believe Wheeling College was founded as a coeducational institution. I think so. I'd have to check my facts on that. But certainly this was, an enormous leap forward into the 21st century, if you will, happening in the 20th century. And it, I think, enriched the classroom experience. And of course, because the number of women was kept to about a third or less, I believe in the size of the freshman class, they picked the brightest young talent they could. And that was really rather significant, because you were bringing in a very, very strong group of women who were going to live up to the test, and obviously have lived up to it and have been wonderfully successful as the years have gone on.
I hope there hasn't been any negative feedback. Have you experienced any negative instances or factors?
Well, I think it's inevitable that when there is a change of this sort, when faculty have been used to teaching at an all-male institution, there is a certain difference in single-sex institutions and in terms of attention to the special needs of each of the groups. And some of those needs are met, and some of them even today remain vestiges of the fact that this was an all-male institution. So I think there are transformations that people need to make to just deal with the whole changing environment, and indeed socially as well as intellectually, as well as just in terms of ordinary special needs. That's an enormous transformation. I did have the good fortune of knowing Professor Josephine Castan, who was the first woman dean of students, who paved the way for coeducation, and certainly who anticipated many of the special needs that would come along. And so there was a great deal of effort to work with the young women and to see that their needs were served. And I believe this is something that we need to always be mindful of and always continue to do.
Excellent. Okay, well, the other great thing about St. Peter's is the diversity, ethnic, cultural. I know it started out as a not particularly Irish, German, Catholic institution. Can you tell me about some of your feelings about the presence of African Americans, Hispanics, and other wonderful ethnic groups here on campus?
I grew up in a family that was very interested in diversity before that even became a word. So I, through my years in school, had friends of various backgrounds and various cultures, and I feel very fortunate to have had that experience. Also to have known people of various religious persuasions and preferences over the years. So for me, it was a rather natural experience to come to an institution that was diverse, increasingly so from these 3 decades that have certainly reflected the changing populations of Jersey City and of the immediate metropolitan area. So for me, that's an important richness. For the last probably 20 years, I've been very involved in programs of the NCCJ. Now, that's the National Conference of Christians and Jews, which today has a new interpretation of its acronym. It's now called the National Conference for Community and Justice, which seems right on target with Jesuit education. The NCCJ has historically sponsored programs that would reduce prejudice and promote harmony. One of the interesting things that happened right here at St. Peter's in cooperation with the NCCJ were a set of formal hearings that we held on campus to deal with cultural violence. I was a major part of that development of the program and very pleased to do so, along with colleagues Dr. Robert Perry and Dr. David Surrey. And upon gathering that testimony, we subsequently went to a congressional committee in Washington and presented that information to raise consciousness and hopefully lead to improved legislation. Following it was also a conference, a day-long conference that brought together religious leaders, educators, and law enforcement officials to deal in that issue as well. The issues of cultural violence, the issues of racial and cultural and diversity, if you will, harmony. We continue to be very much a part of that. As an institution like St. Peter's, with students being born in more than 70 nations, maybe speaking 40 different languages, as I walk around the campus, it's one of the reasons, it's interesting that question comes up, because when I first came to St. Peter's, I didn't plan to stay more than a few years. And so much for thoughts at a moment. One of the real reasons I stayed was that I liked a diversity of people. I liked seeing the world around me. And I also liked working with students who, if they were motivated and if they worked at it, because I have a lot of patience for helping people who are willing to help themselves. And because of that, helping people come up by the bootstraps, to me, is an extremely important part of the American dream, and that was part, I think, of the St. Peter's dream, and always has been. So that was very attractive to me, and that was one of the things that kept me at St. Peter's. One of my former students just recently said to me that one question I asked on a test was, what was the author of her book? And she knew all the math, she didn't know that one. I asked her if she remembered to always check the author of her book in the future, and she sure did. And she reminded me that even after I was here only a year, because she had me the second year I was here, she said, "You were firm but fair." And that's a slogan that I was very appreciative of, because it's that kind of, I believe, attitude among faculty dealing with a diverse audience that's absolutely critical in bringing the best out of people, and hopefully making them constantly reach for the goal and reach a little higher, stretch a little more. Part of that Jesuit objective of the more, the magis, the doing more, and ultimately succeeding for oneself and also for the community at large.
Wonderful. My man. How you doing, Eileen?
Oh, thank you.
You're doing great.
That's lovely. Is this okay?
Isn't she doing great, Bill?
Fine.
Good, thank you.
Wow. The author of the textbook, I always get nailed on that. Wow, that's a blast from the past. All right.
Did I tell you about the Math Speakers Bureau?
No, please do.
No. You had asked what are some of the things that kind of I thought about initiating or trying to initiate. One was, again, to spread the news about St. Peter's and to spread the news about how great math is as a major. I had decided and I had recommended to the department that we start a Math Speakers Bureau. And sure enough, we did. And it was in those early years where we actually went to dozens and dozens of high schools in the metropolitan area talking about mathematics, giving a math talk, sometimes bringing a student with us to have them be part of the presentation, and also giving a little commercial message for why St. Peter's is a terrific school to go to. So it was a wonderful experience. Our students got out, we got out to see what was happening in the high schools, because we were literally teaching students who had just graduated from high school. And at the same time, spreading why we thought math was important. So it was good.
Wonderful. And you mentioned here Danforth Associates. Can you tell me something about that?
Okay. The Danforth family is a family out of St. Louis, Missouri, that owned the Ralston Purina company, and they were known as being major philanthropists. Many, many years ago, they started a program called the Danforth Associateship, whereby they would select faculty members from colleges around the country to humanize the educational experience. And you were nominated somewhat secretly by somebody, some other faculty member. And one day I got a letter that I had been named a Danforth Associate, much to my delight and amazement. And it meant that I would partake of a national week-long series of conversations about faculty teaching and so forth. And it crossed disciplines, which was what was exciting. It went across all the disciplines. The year I went to Estes Park, and I went to a conference called The Professor and the Politician, which brought together the governor of Oregon, Green at the time, congressional representative Heckler, a whole host of prominent political people at that time, to talk about the relationship between education and the political arena. And then each year we would have various conferences. What was exciting about it, it used to be held only, the faculty members were selected from normally Protestant-based independent colleges, and gradually it increased to include colleges that were Catholic as well. And it had originally been only men that were invited, and my year was the first year that women were invited. And where spouses were included in it if a person was married as well. And I'm happy to say that I, in subsequent years, was then allowed to nominate, and our group grew bigger, and Professor Josephine Castan became a member, as did Dr. Calianis and his wife, Mrs. Calianis, because it was a partnership, Dr. Cannon, and Father Rinn. So it was a wonderful group, and we would have a conference attended in the New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania region once a year, and an opportunity to deal with themes of culture, themes of spirituality, themes of how you can teach better, how you deal with students, and then we would hopefully bring it back. And we ran several projects here on campus related to it. One was how the liberal arts experience would be a parcel of every student's life. And it was through that experience that we brought back some of our distinguished graduates as panelists. And in fact, I can remember one in particular, Herb Jordan, who was one of our distinguished graduates in the business field, and he came back and spoke, and he eventually became a trustee of St. Peter's. And he subsequently, a very good friend of his, Charles and Joanne McCarthy, became trustees as well, and philanthropists of the institution. And I credit the fact that I had a little problem with the tires on my '78 Regal. And those tires were General Tires, and Mr. Jordan was president of General Tires in New Jersey. And I happened to meet him quite by accident, but it led to a wonderful opportunity for him to join the Danforth group. And there were many, many projects throughout the years that have enabled us to sponsor programs and panels and discussions that would raise consciousness about the liberal arts.
What are some of the projects you were involved in personally?
Well, the one I mentioned, this special speaker, the panel presentation. We also had brown bag lunches and colloquia, where we would bring in some of our alumni to talk to students, to talk about ways that, all kinds of topics. And the basis of it was making a home away from home, humanizing education, making this a comfortable environment. And we would do it by bringing students together to talk with faculty on an informal basis. And now that I'm involved with Operation Connect, trying to encourage students to be more satisfied and to stay at St. Peter's and be retained and graduate, that's the kind of faculty roundtables that we hope to continue, in fact, this coming year. So I'm quite excited about that.
Okay, you've done wonderful things within the math department. I just want to know what's your teaching philosophy and how it fits into a predominantly liberal arts yet diversely academic institution.
That's a good question.
I'm sorry, we can come back to it if you like.
Well, I'll comment a little briefly now, and then maybe we can come back again. My teaching philosophy revolves around really focusing on each individual student, hoping to enable them to have an appreciation for mathematics. For those who are not math majors, and of course the numbers of math majors are relatively small, so I'm reaching, and have over the years reached, a broad audience of students. My goal would be to have them appreciate the power of mathematics in their lives. They may forget the formulas and how to integrate and how to factor a polynomial, but if they can remember the spirit of what mathematics is about, the people who discovered mathematics, if I can humanize mathematics that way, then they'll at least go on, I think, and appreciate it. In the classroom, I would hope that in addition, kind of a byproduct of the academic experience, which of course is the primary focus, is a way that one treats one another, a sense of mutual respect. I grew up in a college where we had an honor system, and so I believe people need to take responsibility for their work. I have little patience, very little patience with anyone who doesn't try, because I've always given students lots of time, and I'm more than willing to give them that support. Not the day before the exam only, but hopefully along the way. And to give them a chance to kind of grow in the experience in terms of being moral, and I say that from the academic point of view, but also rubbing off into their entire way of treating other people. I think the other part of that is punctuality is a big thing with me, showing up, coming to class, a certain amount of discipline, which has its flexibility at times too, so that you realize you're human, but at the same time you have certain limits that one has to just develop in their own lives to cope with the complexities that life will put before one. So philosophically, I think having people reach the best they can, and reaching a balance in their own lives, and hopefully realizing that mathematics is going to play a part in it one way or the other.
That's great. I'm like, wow, so much over my head that I have so much respect.
Well, I certainly try to allay their fears of math anxiety. It was recognized that women suffered from math anxiety more than men, and that women tended to avoid math. And that was borne out in statistics in the 70s when you look at Berkeley, where the young women, only 8% had 4 years of high school math, and something like, the 92% of the men had 4 years of high school math. And it was at that time that there was a major recognition that if we were going to get young women to succeed and be able to take calculus and therefore major in fields that required calculus, which are all your science fields, which more and more are your social science fields, and not be confined to being, although they're noble professions, teaching and nursing and librarianship, which are wonderful professions, but we wanted women to be able to break out of that. Also business, in accountancy, where they had to have mathematical skills. So I was very involved in encouraging women to do that. In fact, became the executive director of the Mathematical Association of America's lectureship program called Women in Mathematics, WHAM, Women in Math. And we involved many speakers that came to St. Peter's to talk with our students, to reach out for kind of consciousness raising in that. So you noted that over the years, in many years, we had the majority of our math majors were women, and as the numbers grew. So that's been an important part of my getting out there also, and encouraging the broader community of young women to know they need it and take more math. And also a program for blacks in mathematics has evolved from that, and Hispanics in mathematics, because certainly that's another very underrepresented group in mathematics. So we're working very hard to change the historic statistics in those areas.
All right, your dissertation was in pure mathematics.
Yes, it was.
And you've taught finite mathematics. Can you tell me some of the other subject titles or course topics you've taught over the years here?
Okay, I've taught advanced calculus, real analysis, topology. You mentioned the finite math, which includes probability and statistics and linear programming. Mathematics for the humanities, which includes a great deal of content and at the same time encourages students to learn about the human dimension of mathematics. I've also taught some of these courses as a writing to learn course. And this goes back a little bit to the question on philosophy in teaching. Writing about what you're learning, I think, is a wonderful way to help you cement the mathematical concepts in your own mind. Writing about how would you solve a particular math problem, how would you attack it? Because you have so many methods in front of you. That's one of the confusions that students have and the frustrations in mathematics, because you have so many different methods that you've been taught. And if you give the word problem, or I call it a story problem, don't call it a story problem. You give the story and you've just studied how to solve it, it's pretty easy. But when you eventually mix them all up and you have all these different methods at your disposal, how do you sort out the red herrings? How do you come to decide with the minimal amount of anxiety which method you're going to try, or recognize that the first method you try might not be the right one? Even I, as a mathematician, may start a problem one way and realize I'm going down a blind alley, that I really need to start it up again. A wonderful way to do that is to have students sit down, write out how they would go about it. And you can sort of see where they might break off. They may not be able to go the whole route. I've also asked students to write me their mathematical autobiography. What have their experiences been in mathematics, good or bad? And they're the most fascinating pieces of written material you can get. So the writing is to reinforce the learning. It certainly hones up their writing skills too, but that's ancillary. It gives students a chance to reflect on what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I think it's a wonderful way of helping our students. So I did participate in the Writing to Learn program here, and I would certainly endorse that and encourage students to keep journals. And even if they don't have to be all formal journals as they would in a required course of Writing to Learn, at least to get in the habit of putting their thoughts down and organizing them. And because when you think about it, mathematics is problem solving. And in many letters I have gotten from former students over the years, some just wonderful letters, they'll say, yeah, now I know what you mean. It was a way of solving a problem and a way of thinking logically. So even if the formulas fly out of your head, you can look them up. You can look them up in a book. Today you would look them up on computer, on a CD-ROM. You'd be able to check the formulas. But what you need to do is know that you can go look for them. You need to know those are the tools of the trade. And of course today, I can remember when I got my first calculator. My parents gave me a brand new calculator. It was $89, I believe. It was for my birthday. It was a Texas Instruments calculator, landmark kind of thing. And now they've gotten smaller and more sophisticated, and now students have computers at their disposal. And I'm a highly technical person myself, even if I have not kept up with all the technology. Personally, I mean, I highly support the use of technology, and probably from my early days at Bell Laboratories, there's no doubt about it. And from the fact that my father was in an engineering field, was involved in aviation all his life, and I grew up loving the idea of an airplane, and took my first ride when I was at Douglas. I went to a conference at Syracuse University, so things like flying and aviation and technology were always part of my life, and things that I still marvel at. I still marvel at the extraordinary accomplishments of technology. But technology is only as good as the human framework we put it in. And I'll share one little tidbit with you. Back in the early 80s, I think it was 82, Admiral Grace Murray Hopper was our commencement speaker. I had, in fact, been the person who recommended her. To my recollection, she was the only commencement speaker that has gotten a standing ovation. And she said to the students that if any of them in the next 2 years ever said, but we've always done it that way, she would instantly materialize and haunt them for 24 hours. So the idea that, you need to always be looking, keeping an anchor, but looking to ways of doing things better. And she asked me a question when I was driving her back to the airport, and she said to me, what was the most significant computer accomplishment in the past year? And I thought it was the silicon chip. And she said, no, it was what was happening at Wright State University. They were developing, and I was a little familiar with it, a computer box that would help a quadriplegic walk. And she said, all this technology, from the days when she invented and was one of the pioneers in COBOL technology and compiling techniques at Harvard, UNIVAC, and all the wonderful things she did, she said, unless I can make that technology improve the human condition, I will not have succeeded. So those are powerful words, and I think the same thing is true in any philosophy of teaching mathematics. Mathematics is the power tool. It is the vehicle by which hopefully we can improve humankind. And that's really what I think it's all about.
Wonderful. Can you tell me about some of the...
Okay. I'm falling apart.
You're doing great.
You were falling apart. Just, I'm going to pull that a little bit over the side.
Oh, okay.
Because you were getting relaxed and looking
Too
good.
relaxed, too
My
relaxed.
tables were good. No,
Okay.
relax. That's the only way to do it.
Oh, good. Hey, okay.
Go
That's
for
great.
It. The
Go for
martinis
it.
are later.
Okay, all right. That's something to strive for here. I don't know if I can handle one of those.
All right, we'll get to your great administrative roles in a moment, but I wanted to ask you first, some of your publications or articles, manuscripts, can you tell me about some of the things you've had published over your career here at St. Peter's?
All right. Yes, I've published a few mathematical articles related to the dissertation, but also related to various other aspects of mathematics. I've written about the issue of women and minorities in mathematics, or not in mathematics, as the case may be, and how we can promote the underrepresented groups to be involved in mathematics, and then mathematics as the vehicle to open other career doors. I've written articles. In fact, I have just recently been invited and have completed an article in the Encyclopedia of Mathematics, which will be dealing with modern ways of instruction, looking at collaborative and cooperative learning, use of technology, opportunities to encourage young people to do mathematics, and the new ways and new strategies that we're trying to do to accomplish that. Another article recently that I have completed is in the area of developmental mathematics. I was invited to do that for the Mathematical Association, how we've had certain successes and what other areas we need to work on in the area of developmental mathematics, which is a major issue. And at this point in time, the whole issue of remedial education in the City and University of New York and elsewhere is certainly a major concern for all of us. And St. Peter's bit that bullet long ago and realized that the American student was not succeeding in mathematics and in many cases in communications. And if we were going to accept a student, we had a responsibility. Much as we would like to push remediation back to the high schools, which is everybody's goal, I believe, we recognized we had a need, and St. Peter's was going to fill that need. Other publications have dealt in the areas of higher education planning, institutional research, and accreditation. So I've been pleased to write articles and a few pieces of books.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the Middle States here, but we'll get to that in a moment. First, I want to know how you were promoted to administrative status, and what was your first administrative post here at St. Peter's?
Well, never did I dream that I would be combining my mathematical life with an administrative life. But I had served on many committees at St. Peter's and have over the years, a whole variety of them. And in 1974, I was approached by, I believe it was Father Yanatelli, who actually talked with me, and Father Ryan, who was the executive vice president, and asked me if I would chair the self-study for an upcoming review of our regional accreditation by the Middle States Association. And of course I was familiar with Middle States, although I had never been on a team or been involved directly in the process. But I was very excited at the challenge and the opportunity. And so I became the chair of that particular self-study steering committee. And then we had a variety of about 10 task forces that worked on this analysis of ourselves. We took a photograph of ourselves. We looked at where we had been, where we were, and where we were going, and produced then in 1976 a self-study document. And a team then came to visit us here at St. Peter's, and happily we got a very fine report. During that preparation, I participated as an observer to a team at Elmira College. This was to kind of a little in-service training, if you will. An interesting anecdote, the chair of the team at Elmira was Dr. Rhoda Dorsey, then the president of Goucher College. She was passing the mantle on to me because the chair of her first team was Father Victor Iannatelli, the president of St. Peter's, so that was kind of an interesting step. But just to get back to Middle States for a moment, subsequently I was asked to chair 2 other self-studies, the one in 83 and the one in 93. And so having directed both of those has been a very interesting experience, and I have served on a number of teams also, both in the United States and abroad, in terms of evaluating other colleges. But back to the original question, my entree into administration. When my position as chair of the self-study was coming to a close, it was clear that around 76 that the college was interested in planning, and part of our recommendation was that the institution move into a more formal planning process. And it was at that time that a position was advertised for assistant to the president, which was to involve the area primarily of planning and institutional research. And that was the position that I came to hold. And in that were a variety of responsibilities. Among them, we had a Jesuit brother here, Brother Jerome Menkhaus, who was my former student in my calculus class, who was one of the students who went to Detroit. He was the director of institutional research full-time. When he decided to go to the Marshall Islands and Pohnpei, Marshall and Caroline Islands, to the missions, we were left with no director of institutional research. So I took that responsibility on, plus the responsibility of the college planning team, which was really, even then, beginning to think about residence halls back in the late 70s, and a host of other responsibilities that kind of fit under that. And I taught 2 courses. And I continued that up just until just a few years ago, when I was not teaching the 2, because that was just a little much. But so that was the beginning. It started with the issue of accreditation and has moved forward. And my title has been assistant to the president for planning, and executive assistant to the president. And probably one of the most exciting things for me is having worked for 4 presidents. Probably the most enriching part of my life. And when people say to me, well, gee, you've been at St. Peter's 31 years, I'll say, but it's like being at very different schools, because under the administration of various presidents, you have a very different institution. And if I can share some insights with them, would you like me to share a few insights about the presidents? I don't think you could create, or God could create, more, 4 men more different in personality, temperament, management style, vision, creativity, all different, and yet all followers of St. Ignatius, and all very Jesuit in all the wonderful senses of that word, all very talented men, and I would really say men for their times. They brought the kind of expertise that has been needed at St. Peter's at that moment. I started working and having the privilege of working for Father Victor Iannatelli, known affectionately as Father Vic, someone who was a true builder of this institution, who shepherded a 10-year building program in the O'Toole Library, the now called Victor Iannatelli Life Center, the Pope Building, None of these were here. Well, the library was here when I came, but the others were not here. There was a Collins Gym here, which no longer is here. There were several buildings that have been razed. But under Father Iannitelli's vision, certainly the library and Pope and the rec center were built to service us long after the initial building was built. So you can see we're still using them. We're growing now and we're straining a bit, but that's more than 25 years later. So that's rather extraordinary. And in the case of the library, certainly well over 32 or 33 years later. So we certainly have a plan that came from the Father Iannitelli years that have stood us in good stead. If Father Iannitelli had met you 10 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago, and he met you on the street and hadn't seen you in between, he'd remember your name. He'd be a person that just reach out warmly to you. I had the pleasure of knowing him, and while he was president, of getting to know Father Lawrence McGinley, who had been president of Fordham for 16 years. Both of them I think of as the quintessential Jesuits. Both of them extraordinarily talented Jesuits who always made people feel good, whether it was the person who was sweeping the floor or serving as a waiter or waitress, or whether it was a Port Authority commissioner that Father Iannitelli worked with at the Port Authority, or Robert Moses that Father McGinley worked with to build Lincoln Center and the Lincoln Center Fordham, whether it was the President of the United States, or whether it was Martin Luther King visiting St. Peter's when Father Iannitelli was president. They always made everyone feel the importance that they are. And that was a wonderful quality. We're very fortunate, and I feel privileged to have known them. The Iannitelli years were followed by Father Edward Glynn, who brought a new vision to St. Peter's, who wanted to build residence halls, and that happened during Father Glynn's administration. Father Glynn was also very sensitive to the needs of diversity. He was very active with accreditation in Middle States. He also was extremely sensitive to having a balanced budget and worked very hard to accomplish that. And indeed, he has gone on to be provincial and now interim president at John Carroll University. And he brought a new vision and was here again. Father Iannitelli, I believe, was 13 years, Father Glynn 12. Longevity and a long period of accomplishment at St. Peter's. His administration was followed by Father Daniel Dagnan, who brought... Father Dagnan is truly a planner and a builder, and he transformed St. Peter's into a residential campus. He moved it forward in terms of a building program. You can see the fruits of that as you walk around the campus. He beautified the campus, has done a tremendous amount to really bring St. Peter's into the 21st century, I should say. And we can be very grateful to Father bringing his talents as a lawyer to St. Peter's and developing a rich institution. And now Father Loughran, who also is moving the institution forward, a very affable person who relates well to the neighboring community and trying to work very hard with the area community to restore the kind of wonderful, rich retail and warm community spirit in the neighboring area. Very interested in developing a strong residential campus and a high quality of life on campus, a strong academic experience for our students. So I think I say in a very, very grateful way how privileged I have felt to have worked with four extraordinary men who have each brought a very unusual and unique dimension to this 125-year institution, each in a very special and distinct way. So if you ask, what makes St. Peter's distinctive, certainly the Jesuit presidents have each made this a very distinctive place and brought it into a very important force, I think is a very important way to put it, a very important force in the state of New Jersey, and now more regionally, because we're even have students now coast to coast. We'll be having students from really around the country, scattered throughout the country. So that's quite exciting for us.
In both your teaching and your administrative roles, how has the Jesuit influence helped you along in your workaday world, or how it's influenced your decisions, or how you've tackled the future prospects of the college?
Jesuitness, if you will, to me is a climate. I like the terminology climate of expectation, that we have a certain expectation here to grow as individuals and to help our students grow as individuals and to develop the collective good through the intellect and the soul and the spirit. And I think it's that entire, and through the ways we interact as a social community, I think the fact that the institution is Jesuit gives us that sense of self and that sense of community at the same time. And I think it's that spiritual dimension that has a great deal to do with developing the right blend. So that environment is what I believe is what we want to foster. And hopefully as new people come into this community, they will experience that. Unfortunately, the numbers of Jesuits is declining, but I believe we still have a very strong community and one of the highest percentages of Jesuits on our full-time faculty. So that's something to be very proud of, and we want to continue that and engage the Jesuits as much as possible. The Jesuit Center that Father Rinn has developed is certainly one way, and now Father Novak coming in as the new rector is one way that we can foster that. And I think we need to keep working at that. The lay people here have assumed a great deal of responsibility for carrying that forward. The National Seminar on Jesuit Education has addressed this. I was pleased to be a member of the first group on that National Seminar group. Through conversations, the magazine conversations, and through conversations about conversations, we want to engage the Jesuits and the lay faculty in that partnership. Neither of us can do it alone. We need to do it as a partnership. And to me, that's something over the years that has been an important theme. And ever more, I believe, a critical part of what will make St. Peter's be a successful engine as it moves forward. Because we need both lay people and Jesuits to be sure that the institution moves forward. I think it's important to have a Jesuit in the top leadership position. I think that's an extremely important factor as long as we can do that. And we've been very fortunate to have very accomplished men in those positions.
Yeah. I was interested. I was wondering if you were in favor of possibly a lay president at some point, just as
I believe that as long as the Society of Jesus has qualified Jesuits to hold the positions, that would be the first priority. Now, we know that we also have a very successful sister who is president of the University of Detroit Mercy, and she has done an extraordinary job. So it proves that one can be the president of a Jesuit institution and not be a Jesuit. At the same time, I would hope that, at least in the foreseeable future, Jesuits will be able to hold those positions. I think we must be realistic, though, that at some point it will not be possible, probably, to find enough men, unless the numbers of entering novices changes, who are really interested in that. It's a big responsibility, and it takes, and Jesuits in many cases are trained to be teachers, and many would not pick the route of going into administration. So there probably will be at some point when less than 27 Jesuits will be presidents.
Okay, very good. How you doing? You want a break?
Fine.
Or?
Okay, well, I'll just have another little sip of this.
Wow,
we want to get.
Okay.
Is it okay, Alan?
It's great.
Good.
We're
Okay.
going through
We
your
have to
list
talk
here.
about planning a little bit
That's
too.
right.
I don't
Planning.
want.
That was my next question.
Oh
Planning,
my
CPT,
goodness.
and SPC,
Yeah.
SPC.
I don't know if this is. You follow your own list too.
No,
of course.
we're on this now.
Yeah. All right. Whatever. I mentioned that planning, it's interesting, planning as a formal occupation, if you will, formal higher education planners, was something that came into its own maybe in the last 25 years. But there was always planning of sorts. When there are huge numbers of students knocking doors down to get into colleges, the planning was more building and physical facilities to meet their needs and hiring of faculties. But there was always somebody in some major chair, the trustee chairs and the presidents, who had vision. And, some vision was clearer than others, but to keep those positions and to be successful, they had their own plans, and they certainly brought them forward, and many places obviously thrived. When many competing interests came in and there was competition for students and financial needs were quite demanding, then there was a need for a more structured planning process. And also after the 60s, when things exploded on the college campuses and there was a cry for involvement, faculty being more involved in the future of the institution, students being involved, the democratic process. When that happened, there was a need to have a larger umbrella to engage the college community, to plan for the future. So too at St. Peter's in the 76, 77 period. The president, Father Anatelli, created the college planning team. And that was a group of people with broad vision of the institution, faculty, administrators, and students, who looked at the future of the institution, looked at, for instance, Englewood Cliffs was coming into its own at that point. We did an analysis of looking for the future of residential life, of a host of things at the institution, of admissions, and enrollment, and the kinds of scholarships we offered, and just the physical facilities that we had. And that was in effect until the 80s. And that presented reports to the president, and then he would act on them and so forth, and this was true in Father Glynn's administration as well. And then we felt at one point that we ought to also involve line officers, because budget issues were serious and other matters that involved some of the people with the expertise. And hence, from the college planning team grew what is now called the Strategic Planning Committee, which has been in effect for many years and has a similar role and involves the vice presidents as well as some elected faculty and administrators and students. In the transition between the college planning team, which I had chaired, and the Strategic Planning Committee, we had applied for and received a grant from called CAPE, the Consortium for the Advancement of Private Higher Education. Actually, this is a group of corporations that got together to pool some resources, and their goal was to help four-year liberal arts colleges like St. Peter's. You had to be invited to apply. Well, I'm pleased to tell you that our application was received and accepted, and we were given a grant, and in fact, eventually asked to present our model to CAPE and to other colleges and universities. And the purpose of it was severalfold. We looked at our retention efforts, we looked at our marketing efforts, and we looked at our planning efforts. We engaged Barton Gillette, which was a consulting firm, on some of the retention and marketing issues. We engaged Dr. George Keller, who has long been an outstanding academic planner. He wrote the landmark book called Academic Strategy, The Management Revolution in Higher Education. He went with us to the Chauncey Center in Princeton, where we had really the first planning session, involved about 40 people from St. Peter's. Stayed overnight a couple of nights, and we looked at the future of St. Peter's. Interesting enough, that was under Father Glynn's administration. Under Father Loughran's administration, we have also brought in George Keller to speak to us at several planning retreats that we've held. And that led to the restructuring of the Strategic Planning Committee, but indeed with continuing goals of being an arm of the President's office to engage the college community at large in planning for the future and developing strategic plans, which we have had many of them through the college planning team and the Strategic Planning Committee. And those plans have been designed to look at the academic, the physical facilities, the fundraising, the finance, and the public relations. In other words, a strategic plan is not every plan that comprises a strategic plan needs to be done at the same moment. Ideally, they would be, but they simply, physically cannot be done that way. But you have a vision in your strategic plan where you want to go, and then you look at what the academic component is, what physical facilities you're going to need, how much money you'll need, and is it through your budgeting process or is it through raising new monies? And how are you going to market yourself? What image are we going to have? An image is, at least to me, extremely important. We're the Jesuit College of New Jersey. What does that mean? What does it conjure up in your mind when you hear the word St. Peter's College? Well, lots of things. And we want them to be good things. And we want it to be quality, students who are contented, that are challenged, that leave here with a sense of social responsibility, that are going to be good citizens, hopefully good family people, that will be able to cope with the complexities of the lives that will be out there, that are just waiting for them. So the issue of planning, and of course planning and action are critical. You have to have action, you can't just have plans, dusty old plans, but rather I think St. Peter's has tried very hard to implement its plans. And what supports all that planning is good institutional research, good quantitative analysis, good data, good information that we can analyze and pluck from all that information through that enormous fact file that we have, that we produce each year, that has a lot of the statistical facts of St. Peter's. Through that, you need to cull the nuggets of information that help you make decisions. And ultimately, that's what your planning process is, to give us, in your institutional research effort, give as much raw information and analyzed information that will help the decision makers make an informed decision and move St. Peter's into new levels.
Along with statistical research, what other tangible features or just the human value of St. Peter's, how does that fit into how you plan or move St. Peter's forward in the public's mind?
Well, we certainly can just look at the graduates of St. Peter's as an example of how the human product of this institution has really revolutionized New Jersey. The president of Blue Cross Blue Shield, Mr. Marino, who is also the chair of our board now. The president of Public Service Electric and Gas, Mr. Larry Cody. The vice president of Blue Cross, Pam Miller. I mentioned Bill Gutch, who used to be with the Hayden Planetarium. So many of our graduates who hold positions of great responsibility, Mr. Doria in the Assembly, Congressman Menendez. One thing I have to say, we point to these very prominent alums, and they certainly are the ones you read about in the magazines. But let us remember that equally important are our alums that are out there being parents of children that are in soccer teams and that are Eucharistic ministers in their parishes, that are working on ambulance corps, that are doing wonderful jobs as teachers and as lawyers and doctors and administrators and homemakers, working for newspapers, from the editor and publisher's position to the reporter on the beat, to the administrative assistant, to those that are self-employed and run businesses. It's just like that glossy travel brochure that never shows any rain. In our glossy brochures, we may emphasize those that have gotten titles that are very prestigious, and those are certainly wonderful examples of our successes. But I think equally important are our successes up and down the ladder. Successes are people who are able to lead a very contented and happy life and have the Jesuit values that we have tried to instill in them. And so I think that's the real success. And they're the ones that are in our New Jersey communities. We have large numbers of students stay in New Jersey. We are a college for New Jersey. And then students that are literally around the world. And with internet, we can keep in touch with all of them. So I think that's probably our best proof of success.
Okay, you mentioned the presidents, the ones you work with. Can you tell me about some of the vice presidents that you work with, been influenced by, or who you've influenced?
Oh, well, I hope I've influenced people for the good. I've enjoyed working with everyone. One of the things I enjoy most is working with people. And certainly over the years, I've worked with a variety of people, have served on a number of search teams that have brought people to the college. Certainly over the years, I've worked with Dr. Martin, Dr. Grant, Mr. Reuter, Father Heavey, Mr. Barletta, Mr. Larkin, Mr. Kennedy. Oh, goodness. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone, and I don't mean to. But a host of Father Canavan, Father John Canavan, who was the academic vice president, Father Brandy, Mr. Morgan, and just so many people over the years. And I feel the most important thing is that we work for the institution. My goal is to, as someone who reports to the president, I see one of my responsibilities to work with all areas of the institution and to be a catalyst to cross areas when something is of an institutional nature. For instance, retention. I call it Operation Connect. The better we connect to students, the more likely they are to be satisfied, the more likely they are to stay and graduate. That's our basic goal here. And that involves academic affairs, student affairs, development, because you need the resources, and finance and administrative services. So really, it's across the institution. So I have certainly enjoyed working with all of them. And I think everyone has strengths and everyone has weaknesses, and we try to compensate for each other to try to make it a working team. And that's what makes it go, to have a good team.
Excellent. Okay, can you tell me, mentions here you met the General of the Society of Jesus.
Yes, I was so thrilled. Father Yanatelli and Father McGinley and I went to St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, and we had occasion to, it was I thought their 125th anniversary. Would that have been right? This is quite a number of years ago.
St. Joseph's 56.
Was it 56? Or could it have been 150? I don't think so. That was 125. Well, in any event, Princess Grace was there, because her family was from Philadelphia, and Father Pedro Arrupe, who was the General of the Society. And I had just the most wonderful experience, very worried about meeting this very holy man. And we had just a wonderful visit with him. And now Father Kolvenbach is coming here in October of 1998, and I certainly am very excited about looking forward to my opportunity to meet the second of the generals. So I'm excited about that. It's a real privilege. I mean, when you meet someone, holy person and extraordinary Jesuit, it's really quite exciting.
Wonderful. Okay, the centennial last year, 1997, the 125th anniversary of St. Peter's College. What was some of your involvement in that project?
Okay. Well, I should say that I was here for the centennial, which was the 100th anniversary, and now the was it sesquicentennial? I want to be sure I pronounced that right. We better check that one out. I meant to look that up. Actually, I was the person who wanted to use that word and checked the Latin for it. I should have. I don't think I have that down pat. However, it's been rather interesting, thinking I've here this long, that I was here for the celebration of the centennial, and I served on that steering committee, and then again the celebration of the 125th anniversary, and that was shepherded by the Committee on Catholic and Jesuit Identity. They planned the 125th celebration, and happily I had the privilege of being on that committee as well, and also of having been asked to do a reading at the Mass for the 125th. So that was very, very exciting to me. And in both, it just was a wonderful time to reflect on all the years that St. Peter's has been here. In the centennial, what was very interesting, we had a series after which the Durant Visiting Professorship Series is modeled, called Mini Professors. And we would bring in a person. I directed that program, and that's why it was particularly dear to me. we brought in speakers, very distinguished speakers, on all kinds of subjects, from Governor Hughes, who was then the governor of the state of New Jersey, to Dr. Thomas Soddy, who was an operations research person, to Dr. Shohao Lee, who had done landmark research on the pituitary gland, just to Dr. Mason Gross, who had been president of Rutgers University and winner of the Micklejohn Award. Just an extraordinary collection of people who came into St. Peter's and were here a few days, not many in stature, but many in duration of time here. And that was a really important part of the centennial, as was the creation of the Business Symposium. And Mr. Fred Jacks, whom you'll hear from also, was instrumental in developing that, as were a few of us who thought this was a wonderful way to recognize the business community. So many things have grown from that 1972 celebration. And now, again in 1997, one exciting thing to remember was in that 125th celebration, we had both the college people and the prep people. And the prep is very near and dear to my heart. In fact, I wear my prep watch every day. And I'll tell you why, because first of all, it's a great watch. But I received it because I had given the commencement address at the prep several years ago, about 4 years ago. Probably one of the most daunting experiences of my life, what to say to 17 and 18-year-old young men. And by the way, I think the prep is a fine place to remain all-male. I think there's definitely a place for all-male and all-female high schools, even colleges. I think they have a real important role to play. I had never been down to really tour the prep, but had spoken to Father Parks about it once or twice when he was the president of the prep and was on our board here at the college. And he invited me down one day to get a tour. And lo and behold, a few years later, I was invited to be a member of the Board of Trustees of St. Peter's Prep and the first woman on the board. And that was exciting. And I just think that's a wonderful place. The students just love it. And it's a very, very formative years for young men. And I had had hundreds of students that had come from the prep through my math classes. And I'm delighted to say we have a strong presence of prep graduates here at the college again, and want to continue that. So I have a real fondness for the prep, and also for the fact that the prep and the college were once one, and we now have a very harmonious relationship together, and I think that's very important. I think it's just a marvelous place, and we feel really blessed to have this Jesuit presence in New Jersey. I think it's great.
Like you say, the connection, prep, college. What are your feelings about St. Peter's University? Do you have any?
I would be perfectly happy if we stayed at college or if we became a university. Personally, I think it's unfortunate that the colleges in New Jersey have felt it necessary to become universities. This all kind of started in Pennsylvania, and I still am of the school that university is a research university and so forth, and these are teaching universities, and but I think it now has become more an issue of competition. That should you become a university since other people are becoming universities? So I have no objection to us changing to university status. In fact, we are pursuing analysis of it. I have looked all into that and made a proposal as to how we should go about that. And I believe we probably will pursue it, whether we change the name or not. We certainly have, we will have the qualifications soon. You have to have master's programs in 3 distinct fields in place, operative for 5 years. And that will happen shortly after the turn of the century. Because we have the 3 fields now. We have more. We have education, we have business, we have nursing, and now we have accountancy. But not all of the 4 have been in effect for 5 years. So we shortly will have that. So while I think that places like Dartmouth College and Boston College and many other colleges do very well by keeping that name, if it seems that competitively and for other reasons, and we certainly are a comprehensive institution, that it makes sense to make the name change, then I certainly would be very supportive of that.
Wonderful. How you doing? You want a break or?
Okay, we could just for 1 second.
Sure, no problem. You're doing great so far.
Okay. Oh, great. Let's see. There's so much to say.
I know, and you're doing it.
Am I giving you enough information that?
You're answering questions for me.
Am I okay? Well, and ask me others that you have your own questions too. I just wanted to be sure that I. Just so many wonderful, rich memories. I mean, I just can't begin to tell you. Okay.
Okay, set? Okay.
Ready, set.
We're coming down to the stretch run here. Okay, NCAA certification and self-study team visit. Can you tell me about that process and what's involved with it?
Well, for the first time in the history of St. Peter's, and it's 125 years, we were asked by the NCAA to be part of a new process. If you are a Division I institution, you are required by the NCAA to be certified, namely to fulfill certain criteria that they have established. And they have quite an extreme bureaucracy and very prescriptive norms. We were asked, therefore, to study ourselves, and they gave us a set of areas to look at. One was academic integrity. Basically, do you treat your athletes like you do everyone else? And we certainly have an excellent record. Second one was governance and rules compliance. In other words, do we fulfill and meet all the regulations of NCAA? And we certainly have striven to do that, and indeed we do. The third was fiscal integrity in terms of our financial, keeping good records of budgetary matters pertaining to athletics, and indeed that's true. And then gender equity, and that goes back to, just commitment to equity, it's called, so that the opportunities for women and the opportunities for minority students are on a par with those for men. And of course, as a male institution that has football, there is no comparable sport for women to football in terms of numbers. So if you just look in terms of numbers, there will be a differential. But in terms of resources, we have comparable and equitable resources for men and women. And we analyzed this through a steering committee that I directed and through a series of 4 task forces. They're called subcommittees in this process, one for each of those 4 areas I mentioned. We then produced a self-study, rather thick volume, that analyzed all of the information we were asked to do. And then a team came in to visit us. The team came in April of '98, chaired by Brother Burke from LaSalle University. They looked us over. They spent a few days with us, and they then drafted a report. And I'm happy to say they commended us on the accuracy of the report. They were extremely pleased with the fact that we engage our student athletes in the entire community, just as we do all of our students. And they felt that we had, the only recommendations they made really were related in parallel to those recommendations that we had already said about ourselves. So now, the end of October of '98, we will receive the final decision on certification. So it's interesting. It was a self-study along the lines of a middle state self-study, and yet the process was quite different. So it was an enriching experience for me because it was different, and I got to know the people in the athletics department in ways that I had not known them before. So we had a good experience, and we had a lot of people involved in the process, so that it heightened the awareness of the college to, the enormous investment that we put in athletics. There's a very big investment in it, and of course the students work very hard at it. We find the Student Athlete Council to be a very impressive group of young people. So I think St. Peter's can be very proud as a peacock of all the students that participate in its athletics program. So it was good.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about different. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it was different, a different experience for me.
Okay, I was going to ask you about the middle states and how it tied into self-study. Only if it's not classified or confidential information. What do they look for in terms of approval and certification?
There's a booklet called The Characteristics of Excellence, which provides a broad brushstroke of what a quality academic institution should be. And it talks about your faculty, your students, your board of trustees, your governance, your physical facilities, the way you fundraise, the way you budget. And it gives you not a narrowly prescriptive list, but it gives you guidelines of what is expected at a quality institution. Then you write about yourself in those areas and examine whether or not you really fulfill those characteristics of excellence. And if you have weaknesses, they understand you're going to have weaknesses. You're a human organization. But have you recognized the weaknesses? That's one question. And have you then made a plan to improve them? So that's really what it's all about. And if you really, my philosophy behind self-studies and accreditation and any of things of the sort, you're fooling yourself if you just do it as an exercise to get through an accreditation visit. But if you do it for yourself and you're honest with yourself, you praise yourself for your strengths, you identify your weaknesses, and you try to suggest how you're going to have some action steps to correct the problems, you're helping yourself and you're fulfilling an external requirement at the same time. And if you fold that process into your day-to-day operation and your future planning, I think you'll be very successful. And St. Peter's has done that. I should mention to you, I believe it was the 83 self-study. We received very good commendations on all of our self-studies, and in 83 it was even translated into Spanish to be used throughout South America and in Spain, and the Caribbean, so we were quite pleased with that.
That's great. Okay, inauguration, the swearing in of presidents. It says you were involved with the Father Degnan and Father Logren, where you chaired that one. Can you tell me what goes into the process? Because I know you did a great job with Father Logren's personal experience. Tell me step by step how it goes and what your involvement was in the process.
Well, inaugurations are monumental events, and the goal is to keep within a reasonable budget and at the same time give an appropriate acknowledgement of a new president, beginning of a new generation at the college, showcasing your institution to representatives of other colleges and universities who come, and other honor societies that come to respect your president and honor him or her. And it's an enormous task, particularly with thin resources, and involves everything from designing a program that will be appropriate for the archives for years to come, to settling on who will be the speaker and how long they will speak and who will sit where on the podium, to what refreshments will be served and how will you set all this up and how will you have people park and be happy, and what do you do if it rains, which we experienced, unfortunately, with Father Lochran's inauguration. But I think despite the fact that we had some inclement weather early on, it turned out to be a beautiful day. And although we had to move things inside, we had a plan. So it goes back again to good, sound, solid planning and having contingency plans that sometimes you need to implement. The inaugurations have, I believe, been well received, as you mentioned, and we certainly have had a wonderful participation and a lot of spirit and a lot of enthusiasm about the inaugurations over the years. So it's been a privilege again to be a part of it. I certainly enjoy the experience of chairing it for Father Lochran and having served on the committees for the prior two presidents.
Wonderful.
I even got my mother involved. You know, when Father Degnan's inauguration was coming, she was very helpful in not only stuffing envelopes, but hand addressing envelopes. We wanted them to be handwritten. So I should mention that my family is sort of a part of St. Peter's. My whole life, my mother and father have felt a real integral part of St. Peter's College, and have great affection for the Jesuits, whom they've come to know. When they were married 50 years, my Father Yanatelli came, and Father Degnan, and Father Yanatelli and Father Doyle, who is another graduate of St. Peter's, who had married my parents, had witnessed the marriage ceremony. Both he and Father Yanatelli were there to renew their vows. So it was very exciting for my parents and for me. And I feel that St. Peter's has always been a very important part of my personal family, as well as my professional family.
That's wonderful. I was going to ask you about that. Father Doyle, renewing the vows
Right,
after 50.
right.
That's wonderful. And happy birthday to your father, by the way.
Oh, thank you. 89 today.
Yes, yes. Okay, we're going down to the end here. It says here you were on countless committees, search groups, and diverse roles. Aside from the ones previously mentioned, what are some of the ones that stand out in your mind, and what was your involvement with them?
I guess I served one term on the Faculty Senate Committee, and I was on the Tenure Committee, and the Catholic and Jesuit Identity, I think I had mentioned, the various planning committees that have come along. I should have really looked these up. There's so many. I mean, there must be dozens of them. Many in the department. I also chaired several search committees for various positions, including the Dean for Enrollment, the Academic Vice President, the Vice President for Advancement, the Director of Campus Ministry. Those have been all interesting experiences. And over the years, there have just been a variety of ad hoc committees, academic committees, part of the academic plan. I served on several of the subcommittees for that. A mission committee to review our mission. There were just a whole collection of course, the self-studies directing those and having a variety of committees that interacted with that experience. Gee, there's a lot.
Okay, can you tell me about the Board of Regents and the Board of Trustees? How are they made up, and what are some of the activities they're involved in?
In my present position with Father Loughran, I am a liaison to the trustees in terms of organizing meetings and so on. You mean in terms of how they work?
Exactly, yes. And their involvement.
The Board of Trustees has always been the major holding company of the institution. And originally it consisted only of Jesuits, and they were internal to the institution. It was in the late 60s that an enabling act in the state legislature, which was put forward by Senator Guarini, Frank Guarini at the time, who's been a good friend of St. Peter's, enabled the institution to bring lay members on that board. Actually, just prior to that enabling act, I should mention that external Jesuits who were not in the St. Peter's community, were then allowed to be on the board. And then lay members, and as you know, the rest is history, and many chairs have been lay as well. But in that period when there were no lay members on the Board of Trustees, Father Iannatelli wanted to have some advisors and to get members of the business and corporate community to advise the institution and to be providing some corporate leadership and ideas on how we deal with the community. And so they created a Board of Regents. And the regents consist of people who are leaders in various professional communities, education, business, corporate, etc., and community leaders. And they became an advisor to the president. Now, when it then became possible to have lay members on the Board of Trustees, the question was, well, should we continue two boards? And the decision was made, yes, because sometimes people cannot give as much time to the Board of Trustees, which is, an extremely demanding position, but would like to be advisory to the college. And so that group can be larger. They can provide input on a variety of other issues. Furthermore, it can be a training ground for someone to become a trustee. It is an opportunity for a trustee who has fulfilled his or her term, because we have two contiguous 3-year terms are maximum for serving on the board. Then, of course, you could step off from the Board of Trustees and be reappointed after a year time has lapsed. But for many people, they may not be able to come back to the Board of Trustees, and you always want fresh ideas and fresh people on it, but you can still keep their expertise as part of your family and then make them a Board of Regent member. So it has been a very happy way of keeping two boards. And once a year, the Board of Trustees meets jointly with the Board of Regents, and that's usually at the annual meeting in May.
Yeah, very good. Okay, personal memories, special moments, and all that good stuff.
I have just, there are so many special moments. Probably the most important special moment is dealing with your students and seeing them do well on a math test and then hearing from them later after they've graduated about how well they're doing. Those are special. Those are real special moments.
But then we get the physical awards of your greatness. Cross keys and the Bene Merin. My Latin's bad.
Right, Bene Merin. Well, there have been a lot of interesting things, Jess. If you're here 20 years at St. Peter's, you receive a wonderful medal. It used to be solid gold, but my year, I think, or maybe year before, they no longer could afford to give solid gold. So we have gold plate. But it's a Bene Merin, well merited for your 20 years of service, and you have a colleague give a little talk about you. And at that time, Father Keating had given a talk about me. He was the first Jesuit I had met. And since then, I've had the privilege of having been invited by Father Rinn and Dr. Pradamastro to give their citation. So that was quite exciting. Another very special moment for me was in 1976 when I received the George F. Johnson S.J. Alumni Faculty Award. I was the 9th recipient, and it was a very exciting evening. It was held at the Holiday Inn Jetport, which is brand new. And Patty Kiernan, the wife of Dr. Bill Cole Kiernan, was the manager there. And it was a wonderfully exciting evening for my parents and for me. And I was very, very honored to be honored by colleagues. And then I was also inducted into Blue Keys, which is part of the Cross Keys for service to the college. And Alpha Sigma Nu, a wonderful Jesuit honor society that we resurrected. I believe it was Father Brandy that had been a member when he was a student, and then it had kind of, I guess, drifted, and then we restored it back again, and I was very pleased to be named an honorary member. And it happened that it was on my birthday, and my parents were also invited, and they don't often come to the college. They came for that evening and for the Bene Merin and the Johnson Award. So that was extremely exciting for me, and I was really very pleased and honored to have received that recognition. So it has meant a great deal to me, and always will.
Okay. Well deserved too.
Thank you.
Okay, the changes to St. Peter's College have been many since you started here in the mid-'60s. Commuter to residences, community transformations, and you say it's true to the mission. Can you tell me about what some of the involvement you had with these changes, and also what you see for St. Peter's in the 21st century?
Well, just looking at the place, just looking at the college, we still have a parking problem. When I was here in the days of, when I first came, we had a trimester situation. And, we would teach 4 days and have 1 day, everybody had Wednesday off. And finding a parking spot was not the easiest thing, as everybody knows. And as I mentioned earlier, there were buildings, the College Gym and various other buildings that are no longer here, that have been raised, little houses. And now we're buying other houses, and eventually they'll be raised and new buildings will be erected. So if one looks at the physical plant, it was a much smaller institution at the time, and now is growing and expanding both in an east-west direction and in a north-south direction. There were buildings we looked at back then that we couldn't afford to buy and subsequently have bought, which is great. Opportunities presented themselves. So physically, major transformations. Certainly the fact that we're about half women and half men in the day session. In the evening, we're about 64% women, and at Englewood Cliffs maybe 70+% women. Is a major change, a significant change. The fact that there are many fewer Jesuits is another notable change from the early days. Certainly the administration was, the top administration was all Jesuit, and of course now it's primarily the president and the alumni chaplain that is Jesuit. That's a significant change. We wish that could be reversed to some extent. The heart and soul, though, the people of the college are what makes it tick, the faculty. Many of my colleagues who started with me are still here, and many others have retired. Several that came in my class, if you will, my class entering in 67, have moved on to other things. Dr. Basha McCarr in the math department, Dr. Vince Flaherty in the education department, Mrs. Mary George, who was a librarian. A few people have moved on to new things. But a number of us at the same time, people that were here before me, and Bill Knapp, somebody I've worked with for years, who is just a marvel at performing miracles around this campus. He's got his running shoes on all the time. He's really been a wonderful colleague with whom I've enjoyed working over the years tremendously. We look back on the, another thing we should mention as part of the Institute for the Advancement of Urban Education, the satellite broadcast. I was the project director for dissemination of the IAUE projects, and directed with Bill's tremendous help and many other people's help, the first satellite broadcast, moderated by Rollin Smith of CBS News and featuring Dr. Ernest Boyer, the president of the Carnegie Commission for the Advancement of Teaching, and a stellar group of faculty members and students who talked about all the projects of IAUE, from critical thinking and mathematics to a host of other qualities of how we could improve urban education. So that was a really important, I think, technological feat for St. Peter's, moving with putting satellites on the high schools in the area, a major job that Bill Knapp certainly did a tremendous job with. So that, just getting a satellite dish up on the library, that was a big change. Putting computers, and Dr. Calianis has worked very hard, as has Information Services, to put computers around the campus in a variety of places to have tremendous access. These are people who have really given their life's work to St. Peter's. And so if you say, well, what's true to the mission? Well, it's people who have been devoted to this mission, these umpteen years, and who are still here and still part of the fabric of St. Peter's College, and are really committed to seeing that what it stands for. And some of that's intangible. We can't quite get our arms around all of what that mission and philosophy is. We talk about cura personalis, the fact that we personally give a lot of attention. That makes us different. We may not have the fanciest of facilities, but we have the fanciest of people in that they care about what's happening to the whole development of an individual, from the head to the toes, from the the soul and the spirit, in terms of how we fit into a lifelong of learning. That's what we talk about in a global marketplace with a diversity of people who walk across the campus and you see the world in front of you. So the college, I think, has been true to its mission, where increasingly more students come from families that have gone to college, but there's always the new immigrant student who comes, who's first-generation college student, whose parents know that education is the route to a successful career and a successful life. And we specialize in that kind of student. And we have a commitment that if somebody comes through our doors, we'll offer all the services and support we possibly can to help them connect, if you will. It'd be that Operation connect to St. Peter's, and be a part of this institution. So for me, it's been a wonderful collection of personal memories and professional memories, and great people at every level that we've worked with, from the cafeteria staff, from Sissy and her mother and her whole family that has run that operation through many different advisors, through the student life personnel and the campus ministry, to my faculty colleagues who have been intrigued and interested and devoted to the students, to the host of people that work on our maintenance staff that are there when you need them. And I look back at Walter Ostrowski, whose father-in-law, Leo Krasuski, was a neighbor of the math department. Leo and Irene were down the hall on the second floor of 121 Glenwood, which is now called Loyola Hall. And Leo was here about 40 plus years, serving the college, watching over it. And when he passed away, Irene was permitted the privilege of living in Loyola Hall for the rest of her life. And we meet each other and we reminisce from time to time as she walks around the campus with her little dog. And it's little memories like that that are important to this place and to being proud as peacocks of what it's all about.
Wonderful. And I want to have one more question. Just sum up briefly what St. Peter's has meant to you, and if you have any other additional comments to make, please go ahead.
How many minutes do we have left on our...
You've got about 15 minutes at maximum, maybe 10.
All right. Well, St. Peter's has meant a tremendous amount to me because it's part of my life. It's certainly the majority of my life has been spent here, 31 years. And hopefully many more years I will be able to be a part of St. Peter's College and be an active part of St. Peter's. I've met some marvelous people. The 4 presidents with whom I have worked have been extraordinary men, extraordinary Jesuits from whom I've learned a great deal and with whom I have enjoyed wonderful associations. Through the trustees, the next person you're interviewing is Judge Reginald Stanton, and I've had the privilege over the years of getting to know many of the trustees and regents who have either graduated from the college or been close friends. I'm also reminded of Mr. Sonny Werblin, who was the president of Madison Square Garden and MCA, and a Rutgers graduate, and with whom we had a lot of wonderful conversations about the 2 universities. Dr. Mason Gross, who was president of Rutgers through and signed all my degrees from the university. To a host of people that have been on the board, and Patricia Sheehan, who was the mayor of New Brunswick when I was a student at Rutgers, who was there as the mayor through the riots of New Brunswick, when I rode through the city as a preceptor in one of the dormitories, and who went on and was with J&J for many years. I think we can look at Dr. Lena Edwards, who was a person who came all the way from Lakewood, one of the first black women doctors, who gave back to the city in terms of her maternal care programs, and who came and tutored students, came all the way from Lakewood to tutor students for us. People, so many of whom have been involved, and honorary degree recipients, having been one of the committees that you were asking about. I've been on the honorary degree committee for many, many years, and I've had a privilege of being an angel, if you will, for a number of our honorary degree recipients, and that's been a real special privilege for me to get to know them and to work with them and to write about their lives. So St. Peter's is a real part of my life, always will be. It's opened interesting doors for me to grow, for me to understand what Jesuit education is about, even if we can't put it into 5 words or less, because it's an experience. It's a way of life that hopefully gives us all the strength that we need to enjoy our lives and to give back to others. And that saying of Father Rupe, to be men and women for others, is certainly part of, I think, what St. Ignatius wanted us to do, and part of what I hope I can at least be a small part of. And I appreciate this opportunity to share some history and be part of the next part of the history, too. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Eileen. I really appreciate your time and effort, and you did a wonderful job.
Oh, well, thank you. My privilege.